As fears mount in the West over a major military escalation in Ukraine, the United States is now preparing for talks with Russia. The talks could start within weeks. The announcement follows accusations from Western powers who have blamed Moscow for continuing a major troop build-up on the border with Ukraine. According to a U.S. official, the U.S. is ready to engage in diplomacy as soon as early January, both bilateral and through multiple channels. The official further asserted that any dialogue must be based on reciprocity, which means that the United States also has its concern that will be put on the table. The Kremlin has now grown increasingly insistent that the West and NATO are encroaching dangerously close to Russia's border. Tensions peaked this week when Putin vowed to take retaliatory military steps in response to what he called the West's aggressive stance. Moscow presented the West with sweeping security demands last week. Russia asked NATO to not admit new members and barred the United States from establishing new bases in former Soviet countries. Now the Russian president has called Washington's willingness to discuss the security proposals positive. The US is yet to agree to a time and place on fresh talks with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. The West and Ukraine have accused Russia of weighing a fresh attack on its southern neighbor as soon as next month. Russia is bolstering defenses against Ukrainian government forces. In recent weeks, Russian mercenaries have been deployed to separatist-controlled eastern Ukraine. The Kremlin has, however, denied any connection with the private Russian military contractors. Staging. Moscow has moved tens of thousands of regular troops to staging posts closer to Ukraine. It has also demanded urgent security guarantees from the West. Russia wants to prevent Ukraine and other neighboring countries from being used as a base to attack it. Amid rising tensions, British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss repeated her warning to Russia. She said that any incursion into Ukraine would be a costly mistake. But Truss has welcomed Moscow's willingness to enter talks. Germany and France have called on both sides to respect the restoration of a full ceasefire in eastern Ukraine. In a joint statement, the foreign ministries urged the sides to continue discussions on further steps in the humanitarian field. And for more on this, WION correspondent Stuart Smith is now joining us live from Moscow. Thank you so much for joining us, Stuart. Now, the United States is ready to engage in diplomacy as soon as early January, both through bilateral and multiple channels. What can you tell us about this, and when can we expect this to happen?
Yeah, so speaking off the record on Thursday, in response to what President Vladimir Putin had said at his annual press conference, one White House official said that they would not negotiate publicly, so we're not going to be getting fed lines as this negotiation goes on, but the US would give a full response to the Russian proposals in January. So it seems like the process is not going to be taking place over the next few days. We know that the president of Russia believes the ball is now in the court of the West and NATO countries. He's listed his demands. He's made it very clear exactly what he wants and what he's expecting. And now it's up to the US to decide exactly how they respond. One thing that this White House official says is that there are clearly some things the US would never agree to. And he says he thinks the Russians probably know that, but there are other areas where they may be able to talk.
Right, absolutely, Stuart. Now, talking about the list of demands and also talking about the things that the United States has clearly said that there are some things that they would never agree to. Russia asked NATO to not admit new members, bar the United States from establishing new bases. What can we expect on that front? How can we expect this conversation to go forward on that front?
Yeah, absolutely. So NATO, the Western Military Alliance, says that there is nobody apart from NATO members who can veto other countries joining. So the first thing NATO says is that Russia has no say in this. Russia is not a signatory to the membership of the alliance, and so has no right to decide who and who does not join. And NATO has, even since President Putin started making these very clear demands, has reaffirmed once again that membership to Ukraine remains open if it fulfills NATO criteria. And so at the moment, NATO seems very supportive of Ukraine, that it could still join, so could other countries, and there's no sense at all that NATO is willing to back down on this one. And the problem with that is basically President Putin's number one concern. So how do you start negotiations when the main objective of one side has almost already been ruled out? It'll be interesting to see what the US and NATO come up with.
Absolutely. Now, we've been talking about the troop build-up on the border with Ukraine, also the kind of condemnation that has drawn from the international community. How do you see the situation unfolding?
Yeah, so interestingly, over the last few days, we've seen a change in the number of troops at the border. You might have heard the figure over the past few weeks of around 100,000 troops. It's actually gone down, according to Ukrainian intelligence. But that doesn't mean necessarily that Russia is retreating, just that it's reorganizing its troops. And at the same time, one source has found that there are people being hired, private military companies, private soldiers in effect, have been found in the eastern Ukrainian region of the Donbass, which has been self-declared as an autonomous republic. So it looks like there's movement both in Russia and also within Ukraine itself.
Right. So thank you so much for joining us with all your inputs on this. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.